This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 167.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE family? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, otherwise known as Ramsey. With me is my co-host, Benny Kunungu. I like saying your last name.
It's a nice name.
How are you doing, Benny?
So I'm doing well, thank you. It's a nice little day. Summer has officially started.
You're wearing a jacket.
Recording this, and I'm wearing a jacket. Yes, indeed. Well, where I come from, summer is a little bit hotter than where it is right now, so it's a little chilly.
Yeah, no, it is. It was raining all day yesterday here. So, for those of you living somewhere it doesn't rain all the time in the summer, I envy you.
It doesn't really. I feel like it threatens rain a lot over here more than it actually rains. We get a lot of 40% days where it doesn't actually rain when it says that it would. Because I love the rain personally, and I wish it rained more. But there's a lot of days that I have this false hope, and it's like, oh, never mind, it's a beautiful day. Like, you suck for staying inside today.
Well, it's always 50-50, right? And if you go on the weather network, it's either 50-50 or 100%.
That's fair. I mean, so like just a pro tip, I suppose, at least in my experience. So I used to have a job where it would be very weather reliant, where if like we would have to make sure there was a block of like 4 days of no rain in order to be able to do like a 2-day job, because it had to be like certain days before and after where there were no rain.
Is it like weed pulling or weed killing or something like that?
It was for painting, so like it was just only for exterior stain jobs,
Right.
like staining decks and fences, but like we would do interior exterior painting as well. But the stain jobs in particular needed to have that sun window. And so if we saw a 40% chance of rain on a day, or like when I saw that, I wouldn't take the chance and have my crews like go out and do stuff and then have it rain that day and then pretty much like undo all the work that we did. So the amount of times that we would just not be doing stuff on that day if we didn't have like a non-outdoor job to do, and then it just ends up being a beautiful day outside, was far too often for me to trust the weather network at 40%. But I guess technically that means there's more of a chance of it not raining than it actually raining. But regardless, there was not very strong collaboration between myself and the weather network at the time.
I was worried you're going to make that. All right. So that had nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But Benny just tried to make the segue into our guest, who is known as the Collaborator, John Moore. And he works as a revenue enablement person. He works in revenue enablement, basically. And I didn't know what that was, and I was curious about it and curious about his title as the Collaborator. So we basically discussed that and what it has to do with sales and sales engineering. So it was interesting. I guess maybe you can leave that for the outro. But generally speaking, when we talk about enablement, sales engineers don't tend to come into the picture a lot unless you work for like a huge company or a company actually thought things through. That's my experience. What's been your experience about enablement in general?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it isn't necessarily like in the playbook to do as much, or maybe there's like certain things that are in there that have to do with enablement with respect to like how to train an SE to be good at their job. Like there's some things in there that have to do with enablement around like following up with those questions and like having certain resources you're able to give to different two stakeholders, I suppose, to help move the needle along a little bit faster. But there's never really much of an emphasis on maybe the impact that has, or really like a good sense into maybe the overall picture as to what everybody on our side is doing to close the deal on their side, I guess. So like just to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to communications and the impact of that communication, I don't think maybe is as advertised, I suppose, as it can or should be around enablement. So I think it exists, but maybe like I think it's like sales engineering a little while ago, perhaps, where like it's known about, but perhaps isn't really like talked about as much as it could or should be. But is happening, but just not as.
Are you talking about enablement in general?
I suppose like like all the activities that go into like revenue enablement and even just sales enablement in general.
Yeah. So it's also, I guess, a newer thing. Like the previous company I was in didn't have any enablement whatsoever. My sales engineer enablement person was my manager. Right. The company I'm with has sales enablement today, but it's either geared towards salespeople or technical people. Like the enablement that SEs have is just about the technology, not even how to demo it or how to show it or what value it brings. Just this is the feature. Click this button, click that. Basically the opposite of how we tell people to demo. So it was an interesting conversation. How about we just jump in and see what John has to say?
Let's do it.
How are you doing, Mr. Moore?
I am doing fantastic, Ramsey. It is a pleasure to be here.
Well,
How are you today, though? That's the question. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I was supposed to go sit outside for a while because the kids are not home. I could work from outside. But then I forgot because I started working and I forgot to actually get up and go. But beyond that, I'm good.
I love that story. We get in the zone and sometimes we forget, oh crap, there's actually stuff going on outside of this computer screen that I'm looking at. So I understand that.
Yeah, I'm in the dungeon. Like I have a basement. There's a big window here and a big window here, so a little bit of light comes in. But in Canada, we don't get a lot of sun all the time, so it should get out.
Although it is just the beginning of our summer, so thankfully, any time that we spend indoors, technically we're doing something for the greater good with the pandemic or lockdown and all. But also, we have lots of summer ahead of us, so we'll have some nicer days ahead in no time, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I have a backyard, so I can sit in my backyard. Unlike you, Benny, you're stuck in your house. So you should move to the suburbs like we did. Actually, you are in the suburbs. Never mind. All right. So thanks, John, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Maybe we can start off by you introducing yourself, who you are and what you do and why you're here.
So I run revenue enablement at an enablement solution company, software company called Big Tin Can. So that's my day job. And in that day job, what I'm responsible for is helping the sales managers, helping the customer success managers and the individual contributors all speak with one voice so that when we talk to customers and prospects, they have a consistent understanding of what we do. And that's the goal. And it's using tactics that we're all well familiar with at this point, content, training, coaching, and all those sorts of things. And that's my day job, and I love it a great deal. My night job, my personal passion project is everything to do with the Collaborator and all that I do there. And that's really about raising up the enablement practitioners and leaders across the globe to really build consistency of practice, something that I think is still largely missing globally. So it's part of what I'm doing on that front.
Okay. So I was under the impression that the Collaborator was part of Big Tin Can, but no, it's your own personal side thing.
There's my own personal side thing, and then there's my Big Tin Can life. And there's certainly times where the two run parallel, but they run parallel purposely so that I'm never selling when I'm working as the Collaborator. I don't want to sell Big Tin Can. I'm selling the vision and listening a lot and educating people where possible about enablement. And when I'm working at Big Tin Can, I'm helping customers and talking to prospects, and the two worlds stay separate but parallel.
Okay. Kind of like how I started WeDSEs. I started WeDSEs to get better as an SE for my day job.
I saw that story and it was brilliant because it's exactly what I did too, Ramsey.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I know what I know and I read a lot and all that, but there are so many smart people across this planet that I'm like, you know what? I can get a lot smarter if I just talk to them. And guess what? If I'm going to talk to them, why not benefit everybody else too? So exactly the same reason I started doing what I was doing.
Yeah. I think the big difference between my reason and your reason is people wouldn't talk to me until I told them I had a podcast. that's the sales engineering community is a great community. Everybody talks to each other, but that's what I thought. That's like initially I thought it would be better if I tell them I have a podcast, because I started talking to random people initially that I've never met, and it's like, yeah, I'll do a podcast. What's a podcast? Like, all right. So where did you come up with the name The Collaborator, and why is that your official government name at this point?
It's certainly the name I have in LinkedIn as my official name. I started my career long ago, and I'll keep this story brief because otherwise Benny's beard is going to get even longer and longer. So I want to be sensitive to that. I started my career back in the late 80s working at Lotus Development Corporation, Lotus 123. I was working on DOS. I even wrote code in assembly language. God, that was a long time ago. But one of my first projects after 123 after I moved through that vein and part of life was working on Lotus Notes. And I saw as wonderful as that platform was and as horrible as that platform both was at the same time, the power of collaboration for everything in the business and just the importance of that. And across a lot of the research I've done, personal research about what makes businesses successful, what makes people successful in the various roles, collaboration has always been a cornerstone of what makes an organization successful. And in my role as an enablement professional, it's never been more true. We need to, in order to be successful as businesses and in the enablement role, facilitate conversations, learn from each other, support one another. Sometimes we're teachers, sometimes we're curators, sometimes we're simply note takers, sometimes we're project managers. It's all about connecting within and across the organization. So I thought about it a long time, and I said, who cares what John has to say? But they're going to care about somebody named the Collaborator. That sounds like somebody who, like Madonna. That sounds really cool. So I made that the name that I would go forward with. And I knew a lot of people in the community already, so most of them laughed at me incessantly when I said the Collaborator. But what's been wonderful about it is every single conversation that takes place around enablement, the word collaboration eventually comes up. And when people think collaboration, there's a growing community of enablement professionals that go, oh, the Collaborator. It's an immediate tie-in to the profession that I choose to be a part of, the profession that I seek to try to make better on a global scale each and every day. So it reflected my views of what's the most important thing. And it also selfishly tied a brand into words that are naturally parts of the conversation anyway. So it was sort of a double duty name. A little bit of inception here too, Ramsey, to be honest with you. I'm trying to just keep my name on people's brains. Let's collaborate. Oh, the Collaborator. It's silly, it's stupid. But it has opened up many a fun conversation where people say, tell me about why you go by the name of the Collaborator. And I get to explain a little bit about the thinking behind it, which is both educational and silly, which both benefit my brand and who I am and what I think is important in life.
That's funny. I'm looking at your LinkedIn, and your LinkedIn profile is linkedin.com, whatever, /the-collaborator, which is, a lot easier to remember in my case than Ramsey Marjaba. No one will know how to spell it. So yeah, it's good branding. Like when we talk about branding all the time here, and you've done it.
I think it's just so important because it gives you, if you choose your branding wisely, and this is a conversation isn't about branding, I know, but when we think about what we do as individuals, I fully believe that we have a responsibility to own and drive our careers. And a part of that is branding. And it's not something that a lot of people naturally love doing, but it's an important thing nonetheless.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know, Benny, you want to ask a question?
I see Benny typing and looking at it, and I'm going, okay, what's he going to say?
But I recently wrote a blog for a company called Snackwise about like the 5 levels of branding specifically.
Oh, nice.
Because of that. Because branding is as easy as, doing nothing is kind of branding. And then commenting on other people's posts, that's a level of branding. So, and you can make it as hard or as easy as you want it to be. Sorry, go ahead, Benny. I know you're eager to ask your question. You're on mute. What else is new with Zoom?
Sorry, my mistake. It's I guess the perils of living by a busy street. I try to be considerate, but then I also have the mind of a goldfish, and so I forget I'm on mute sometimes. I did also want to ask a question. So with respect to your brand, and you probably also tell this story when you kind of talk to people that ask about it, around, why you're the Collaborator when it comes to enablement and whatnot, or why are you Mr. Collaborator? How does that have to do with enablement? I guess, have you ever come across any situations, or maybe did this influence the name, any situations where there was a lack of collaboration that essentially broke down, I guess, the whole enablement process, whether it be to the detriment of either the vendor or the buyer?
Oh, absolutely. There's sort of core fundamentals about what makes enablement work or not work. And from a top down, you need to have executive level buy-in. You need a strong executive that sees how this ties into business impact and drives it. You need clear metrics and alignment to KPIs and goals so that you're actually meeting those goals and tying into business progress processes. And then you need to have strong collaboration and communication across the entire organization. And I'll tell you, too often, one of those three simply isn't in place. Either there's an enablement team, but they're kind of there because some thought leader said, hey, you should have an enablement team. And nobody's really knows what they should do and nobody supports it. That's reason one. But a lot of times, in the majority of the cases, it breaks down because we're all working in our individual silos. Marketing and sales, as much as we like to think we've evolved or learned anything over the last century or so, marketing and sales still look at each other like they're idiots from both sides of that table. So there's often a lack of collaboration and respect. And enablement's job, and part of enablement's job is not to be the voice between, but it's to bring those two teams naturally together to talk about multiple ways to reach the prospect in a consistent experience. Because we know, so the short answer is yes, but I was going to say, Benny, we also know that in research studies, I think it was PTC, customers will pay more for a great experience. Customers will buy more often from the vendor that delivers value, consistent value, information, and content at every step of their buying journey. You need to, as an organization, make sure that marketing, sales, customer success, support, every touch point, virtual or real person, is aligned. And that takes a hell of a lot of communication and collaboration. And frankly, it's missing in the vast majority of companies today.
Fair. No, that makes sense. I really love that whole point about, from the top right down to the bottom to every single almost activity that is involved, and whether it be the purchase or the processes of that organization just need to be in alignment. Otherwise, if they aren't, then there might be a breakdown that, could cause any number of issues down the line. So,
I mean, how many times, I know I see this, you see an enterprise deal, it's flying along, it's moving along through the pipeline, and the customer's happy, they're satisfied, they're like, we're going to buy. And then they get into procurement. You mentioned procurement, and it almost feels like it's a brand new world. It's a brand new universe of players, new rules, and all of a sudden that great experience blows up. So it really does have to be across the entire set of processes. And I'm not sitting here pretending that I have it solved at Big Tin Can and that we're all doing everything perfectly magically. I'm as much of a knowledge or whatever, as Ramsey was talking about being early on starting this podcast. I'm trying to learn from others and learn how to improve every day. But it is so fundamental, Benny.
Fair. That makes sense. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do want to take a step back. We just talked about, like, people say, hey, you should have enablement, and people don't know what they're supposed to do. So maybe we should define enablement, and what do enablement professionals actually do? I know it might be a lot of stuff, but maybe you can summarize that.
Yeah, I'm going to summarize it, and I'm going to instantly add a caveat right at the beginning. Part of the problem with enablement, and this is a real problem with the profession, and I know, in my opinion, sales engineering has moved beyond this, which is good. If you ask 10 enablement people what their jobs are, you'll get 15 different answers. And if you were to survey the entire planet, reach out to all 8+ billion people on this planet, above the age of 21 and below the age of 65, they would say either they have never heard of it or they would give you one of those 15 answers. To me, it's simple, though. I really advocate for revenue enablement, but let me start at the beginning. In the beginning of time, when man walked upon this planet, somebody said we need sales enablement. And sales enablement was simply about making it predictable and speeding up the process to move a potential customer, from the time that they reached the first stage of the deal cycle through the time that they bought and you handed them off to support or customer success or whatever business model you were operating with. And that was okay, but it was very seller-centric. It was very much about how we sell. It was very much about our needs. And the reality is today, 70% of buyers, buyers are 70% of the way along the journey before they ever talk to a seller, if they do. Most of them would prefer never to talk to a seller. And the other reality is that there's, the research shows time and again, the seller that leads with value from the very beginning, gives insight and tips from the very first conversation, is the one that most often wins the deal. So there's a couple of points there, but the fundamental point about how people buy today is that it's overstated and it's made a little bit silly. The buyer's in charge. That's the reality. The buyer has all this research available to them, and the successful sellers, the successful businesses today are giving up on wrestling that control away from the buyer. Too many teams say we're customer centric, but then they try to wrestle the control back and get them into their funnel, their stages. Successful organizations, the most successful organizations, are using something called revenue enablement. And revenue enablement is really about understanding the buyer from the time that they start to realize they have a problem. They start to do research on the web, SEO. They start searching for solutions to their pain. So from the time that they start to become aware, through that initial marketing research, through the times that they're going to review sites like G2 and elsewhere, until they actually land in your funnel and start talking to you as a seller or a sales team. The reality is too, there's at least 10 to 15 people involved in every deal cycle. So with revenue enablement, it's also about starting to recognize all those individual people that are involved, their specific needs, their views of the pain. The CFO is going to have a very different view of what they're looking to solve than the sales manager that may be the buyer, that may have a different view than the COO or the CIO, who may simply be part of the decision process. But you need to really meet all of them and meet their needs. And then revenue enablement takes you through the entire sales journey, but trying to flip it and represent it from a buyer perspective. And then takes you through the point that you become a customer, hand it over to customer success if you're working in an organization that has that, and through their lifetime with you as a customer. It's about delivering that consistent, great customer experience all the way through. And even if you eventually leave the company because you no longer have that pain or you find another solution that you want to try, continuing to deliver a consistent message and experience. So when that other product lets them down, you still have a shot of winning them back. That wasn't the 30-word definition, and I'm not going to give you one, because it's really about that journey and that entire process and a true recognition of what being customer and buyer centric means.
So based on what you said, it sounds a lot to me like kind of combination of marketing and sales, or at least marketing gets people into the funnel, and then sales enablement or revenue enablement is what guides them.
It's orchestrating and collaborating across marketing, sales, customer success, finance, and all the other business operations, which is why collaboration and building those alliances, if you want to think of it that way, across your business and outside of your business with partners and so on and so forth, is so critical. So it's not marketing, it's not sales, but it's about breaking down those silos, building those collaborative channels, and helping facilitate and create the programs necessary, whether it's in terms of content, training, or coaching, to help any of those teams or the customers themselves be successful.
In my experience, I'm going to call what we have in our company is sales enablement. They're only internal to our company. They don't deal with the outside world. But based on what you're saying is that you could be providing content to customers as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, in my role, my team supports customer-facing webinars. We sometimes create the content. We actually, because I like to talk more than I should, I'll sometimes be the person doing the webinar or talking to our customers directly, because enablement, well, my specific skills and behaviors, or whatever we want to call them, lend it to that. But in other organizations, I often see enablement teams building content that's not simply for the sellers or the marketers or the customer success teams, but also for customers directly. So they certainly can bridge inside and outside. And in a traditional sales enablement organization, there's really a major focus inward. To your point, it's, I'm going to make these sellers really great. Maybe I'm helping the channel as well, but it's about the sellers themselves, nobody else. As you start to broaden your view and recognize the broader needs, whether it's collaboration and all of that across the organization. Revenue enablement really represents that.
Okay.
I think I put you to sleep.
No.
Put you to sleep. Benny's like sitting over there talking. He's muted again.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been in COVID for a year, Benny, and I still
True.
forget to unmute myself too. So I'm just giving you crap.
I'm on Teams now, where I used to be in a Zoom house. Now I'm in a Teams house, and the shortcut is shorter, or it's a different shortcut to unmute. Here there's Alt involved, whereas in the other one's a Shift. Anyways, my apologies.
No.
Did want to quickly ask, kind of based upon what you were just talking about, particularly, I suppose, when some organizations, they see sales, I guess, buyer enablement to be that sales-centric, activity.
Yeah.
And so my question was going to be are there certain positions, or if you found there to be certain positions that are more conducive than others to be that glue, or almost be that mini, Mr. or Miss Collaborator at their respective organizations? Or is it something where maybe requires a dedicated role for enablement, or is the onus on the culture of the organization itself to be one of just buyer enablement and it's kind of everybody working together?
I'm going to be sacrilegious for a second. In my ideal vision of the future, there's no enablement team. That's sacrilegious for somebody who preaches enablement all day. In my ideal world, businesses, I have this vision of what I call the collaborative business. And that's a business that fully recognizes the importance, and not simply the importance of, but has goals and reward systems and mechanisms from the top down that rewards it, whether it's using OKR systems or whatever else, that really drives and facilitates this collaboration around a common set of goals. Too many times you see marketing teams that are rewarded on MQL, sales is rewarded based upon closing deals. They're not actually related to each other. I could give you 10,000 marketing leads that are all crap, but I still get my bonus if I'm in marketing. And so it's about, I believe that you don't need to have a separate function. I think the reality is, though, that today, most businesses operate as if we're in Henry Ford's first Ford manufacturing plant, and there's a hyper focus on building silos to drive efficiency over effectiveness. We still, as businesses, are thinking to ourselves, I need to drive as much efficiency from each team, when I believe that the efficiency gains we drive by going down into silos and specializing to the level that we do in most businesses compromises effectiveness of the business overall. And some businesses, I think, are starting to get that, but I don't think many are, and I don't even know if any will move beyond it in my lifetime. But I do believe that there is a future state where that's no longer required.
So they're increasing the efficiency of the employee, not necessarily the efficiency of the business.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I've read a lot of different research from on organizational design, and most of there's a lot of research that's been done since Henry Ford first fired up his first manufacturing plant, of course. And I forget the gentleman's name, but there was one person who really demonstrated the high efficiency gains you could get by really, when you look at the first factory lines, building in that specialization around, you know how to do this widget, you know how to do that widget. And it wasn't until, what was it, the 1960s, 1970s, when people started to look at what Honda and the other Japanese manufacturers were doing, that were taking a more holistic view of the manufacturing process and started to give ownership for everybody on the assembly line to sort of pull the stop, to, say, stop the manufacturing. Yeah. We need to actually come together and collaborate across all the different silos to solve this problem before it gets worse. And this lean approach to manufacturing, which was popularized by Japanese manufacturers back then, didn't really, it got picked up on by other manufacturing companies in the US, but we still operate more like Henry Ford's initial manufacturing plants than more of a lean manufacturing model. And the reality is, at the end of the day, we still act as if we're all producing widgets, as opposed to building a business that focuses on solving a specific set of business challenges. I create lead campaigns. I sell. I do this. No, we all do this. And we're not really working that way in most businesses.
Benny, I know you have a comment, but let me add this. So I read somewhere, credible, I think, they kind of did the research, or like it's a story about kids and their parents, and they were trying to build something, and the kids, they decided to do something like a manufacturing plant where everybody does a piece of the puzzle and then they pass it on, somebody else does that, or they finish that piece and then they move on to the next piece, whereas the parent was doing, like, was finishing each product at a time, the whole thing. And they said, oh, the way you're doing it is not efficient, and they had a race, and the person who's doing the entire product was way more efficient than the person doing it in silos, which kind of brings me to the point where, if you have a view, if I understand what marketing needs as a sales engineer, I can help them and provide them information that they would be able to use in their campaigns. And if marketing knows what I need, they'll be able to actually help me out as well. So yeah, like, the more we integrate, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, I've seen similar types of research that have demonstrated similar results as well. But again, we're focused on efficiency. If I can pay this person to do this one thing, and I can hire 50 people to do this one thing, I'm making them so efficient. They don't have to learn anything else, and I can pay inexpensive rates because they only need to know this one little thing.
Yeah.
So it's efficiency over effectiveness over and over and over again.
True. I think it was on this show, like on the podcast, perhaps somewhere else, but I don't think it took until this year for me to really start to appreciate the idea of, I guess, efficiency and effectiveness almost being, I suppose, kind of on opposite ends of the scale, in the sense that there's a nice balance to be struck between the two, where, I don't think it's actually fully maybe on opposite ends of the scale. I think there are situations perhaps where you can make a process more efficient, and by doing so, perhaps the overall effectiveness of the organization perhaps is increased a little bit. However, I think that there's probably just a few cases where that's the case. And typically, when you're going to be striving for efficiencies, you're usually, cutting something off in the world of effectiveness. And the other way around, if you're trying to make something, really great and the best it can be, you're likely making some sacrifices with respect to efficiency.
I'm with you, Benny. And the thing that I would encourage you to think about is, when people are driving for efficiency, they're often not reducing effectiveness from their viewpoint either. Right. If I'm driving efficiency in marketing, I'm probably making the marketing team also more effective. But by making the marketing team more effective and efficient, I may actually be breaking processes that make it harder for sales engineers to be effective. I've changed something that made me much more effective, but guess what? It's now twice as hard for you. And because we operate so regularly in these silos, we don't know. And because we're rewarded in different ways, we don't care.
Such a good point. No, that's a really good point. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, you can be efficient at the wrong things.
Amen on that too. I agree.
Yeah, you have to be effective, and then you can figure out how to be efficient at that first. But be effective first, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't consider that. Yeah, be effective first. Yeah, that's cool.
In terms of, this is a podcast about sales engineering. Where does sales engineering specifically, or pre-sales, depending who you ask, come into revenue enablement?
To me, the sales engineers, the pre-sales, whatever we call them, I agree with you. They're called so many different things, just like enablement. I think we both are in the club of that other group. Does some really cool stuff, but that other group. It's the same in the sense that sales engineers, I'm just going to use that word, sales engineers speak to customers. And when they speak to customers, they need to be speaking with the same voice, the same messaging as everybody else. Now, your slant on the world, what you're trying to educate on, what you're trying to learn about, is different than the seller. So it's often a much more technical role. But at the end of the day, we still need to make sure that every single person who talks to the customer is using the exact same cookbook, is following the same playbook. Everybody is on that same page. So in a well-functioning organization, and that's John's opinion, enablement is helping sales engineers just as much as they're helping anybody else. But the help may be different, meaning we should be connecting and facilitating conversations with pre-sales that bring pre-sales closer to sales, pre-sales in line with, in the loop with marketing, with customer success, so that to the previous conversation, we're looking at the overall revenue creating engine and saying, how do we make it as effective as possible? And that means driving efficiency, of course, throughout it, but it's probably less about efficiency than reducing customer/prospect buyer pain. Because to me, so often we try to optimize our organizations in a way that make our lives easier, but we inadvertently, either through lack of thought or lack of caring, make our buyer's life harder. So revenue enablement needs to absolutely facilitate conversations across the organization. We need to collaborate and make sure everybody's working together from the perspective of how do we make this more effective, but doing so from the buyer angle. I'm just repeating myself because I thought it was such a smart point and I wanted to pat myself on the back. Because too often, again, we optimize, and Benny, to the conversation we just had, we drive efficiency. We do it with lack of caring about how it impacts the rest of the organization, much less how it impacts the outside of the organization. And we need to put through the lens, how do we impact the buyer? How do we impact our customers first?
So what are some of the, Benny, you're on mute, so I'm going to ask. What are some of the common mistakes you see in revenue enablement? Like, how can they improve that buyer enablement perspective of their training or their assistance to the sales and marketing team?
I'll go back to some of the fundamentals first in terms of addressing that. If you're in an organization where you don't have that top level, not just buy-in, but active support, an active champion at the executive level, solve that or stop doing it, because you're not going to be successful. So too many organizations are trying to do it without that top level buy-in. And I'll tell you, it's not going to be successful, and it's a waste of time. It's a paycheck, but it's not going to work. And I see that far too often, where somebody signed off on it, I support this, but unless that person has skin in the game, it's not going to work. And that's a common problem. Another common problem is you fall back to trying to make your teammates as successful as possible without taking the lens of the customer on. We need our team to be successful. We need to make sure our teammates love coming to work every day. They want to be passionate. We want to make sure that they stay forever and deliver tremendous value. But if they do that in a way that it doesn't actually support the customer, it doesn't matter. So a mistake that I see happening too often is we spend weeks, months diving into the CRM system, optimizing our data collection, optimizing how much time sellers and SDRs are spending on the phone, trying to save cost with sales engineers by saying, well, no, you don't need to actually fly out there because it's just not worth it. Do it on the phone. But we don't do it from the perspective of how it impacts the buyer experience, and take a look at that, not simply with emotional biases, but also with real data, both quantitative and qualitative. I think one of the things that really good teams do is deal reviews, for example. You know, if you win a deal, if you lose a deal, do as many of those deal reviews as you can, but not simply internally, Ramsey. Meaning, yeah, talk to the sellers, talk to the pre-sales engineers, talk to everybody involved, but see if you can talk to that prospect too. Because I know, and I don't get to do it nearly enough, and I wish I was doing it more. But when I have the opportunity to talk to a prospect that we didn't win, you learn some interesting stuff. Well, we wrote you off because the guy showed up and didn't have a tie on. Or, you know, I mean, who cares? Stupid ass things that you learn. But sometimes you learn that, well, we picked your competitor because they came to that first meeting. They had the entire team represented in person. They took the time to show up and say that we mattered. You guys had half the team on the phone. We couldn't understand what they were saying. It was a horrible experience. You need to learn what matters to your customers.
I lost the deal because of that. I like, it pisses me off. I like,
No.
because so we met with a customer. He had some requirements that we didn't support, and I'm like, we'll do it. And I went and talked to the PM. The PM said, we'll do it. The competitors brought the PM on the phone. They won the deal. Even though we
Some,
promised, it's just that they brought them on the phone. They showed that they cared.
and some customers won't care about that, but some customers will feel like, well, you missed an opportunity to wow me and raise that experience for me to show you cared, to the words that you just used, Ramsey. And it happens more often than anybody realizes. And too many companies simply aren't having those conversations on the deals that they lost.
Yeah. Well, what I learned from that is I can offer it. Like for me, I promised him that I'm going to do it, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want to waste his time, like meeting with the PMs or whatever. He's like, I know for next time that I'll offer, hey, do you want to meet with our PMs, explain exactly what you want? And if they say yes, great. If they say no, I already explained to you. It's like, all right, cool. I didn't lose anything by sending that email. So just that simple thing. I'm still angry about it. It still hurts. It's been a couple of years.
Hey, Benny, I touched a nerve and I should have used a different example. Next time, warn me.
No, it's okay.
That's the same company. He's not aware of this thing.
No, but that's something that people do wrong. And again, I'm not saying this because I do it perfectly. I'm not saying it because my team does it perfectly. We try to do this with every deal that goes through, and sometimes the customer is willing to talk. Sometimes the seller is like, "Oh, that ended badly. I don't want you to talk to the." So there's a number of reasons why it doesn't happen sometimes. But if you can, to me, that's such a difference maker, and it's simple.
Yeah, I wonder if so I guess my first foray into corporate life was a job at this company called Halogen. They got acquired by Saba, now then by Cornerstone in the talent management space. None of that's important. What is important though is that I was working in a role that was under the product team that allowed me to partake in a win-loss program essentially.
Nice.
And so and I guess because this win-loss program was owned by product, it was, I guess with the slant of trying to improve the product and kind of see what features are out there that really resonate with the customer. But a huge part of it also had to do with that whole sales experience as well. And, a lot of salespeople, like to your point, sometimes they might not want you to speak to a prospect for one reason or another. And as you may imagine, like sometimes it might have to do with the fact that the sales rep was the issue and they could have been the one that caused
Oh
it.
yeah.
And so like
That
just
never
to get
happens.
these insights. Yeah.
But you could lose for any number of reasons, right, Benny?
Absolutely.
So, and if you don't give the customer or the prospect a chance to tell you why you won or lost, you never learn.
True. And even as well, when you call afterwards and like after a loss and you show them this fact or show them that idea that you really, you care about the fact that we lost the deal and we also care about improving ourselves for the future. And we really want to understand more about kind of how you made your decision. I found people to be so forthcoming with the information they shared and whether it be product insights about ours, how they compare to competitors, what competitors were doing, secret things that they have going on that we would never have found out from any sort of online research.
It's a gold mine.
Oh, it's incredible. It's something else. And the lasting impression you just make on them too, I think to what you were saying earlier, I think would be something that would have them more likely to maybe come back around as things don't really change.
Yeah, I'm not saying we want our competitors to fail.
Of course.
But if they do, they remember that you at least picked up the phone and wanted to learn and improve from it, to your exact points, Benny. And it leaves that impression that they remember you.
Exactly. Agreed.
I think it's time to move on to the not so fire at this point. John, I think we can talk to you all day, but let's do that. These are the same 4 questions we ask almost every guest, and I would love to hear what you have to say. It's not so fire on, so you can take your time answering. And usually Benny starts us off if he's off mute.
Yeah, am I off mute? I hope so.
No, you're not. You're still on mute.
I don't talk much, kind of. It's been a while, but I was going to say also not so fire around corrupt in Canada, but it's somewhat cold. I guess it's kind of warm today. But anyways, so I think you talked a little bit about some of the cool things about just revenue enablement and whatnot. But what would you say you love the most around it, or rather love the most about it?
I'll give you 2 answers. I love the fact that it allows you to get involved across the organization And if you are fortunate enough to work in a company that does have the top level buy-in, the top level vision and support, you can work with engineering one day, product the next day, or even hour after hour, marketing, sales, customer success. And it is a unique position. It's not the only position, but it's unique in that characteristic that it gives you the ability to gain a broad perspective of your business, the industry you play in, and it also offers, if you work with customers as well as internal people, sort of that opportunity that so often people are either working with one group or another. You get everywhere, which is fantastic. I also love the fact that it's also really a nascent industry, in my opinion. It's still at the very beginning of its creation as a function. I mean, I jokingly said you ask 10 people what enablement is and you get 15 answers. The sad truth is you probably get 11 because everybody's has different perspectives on it. And I do this globally through my podcast and through my other efforts, in terms of connecting with people across the globe. There's so many people that don't even have a clue it even is something. So it's really still in its early days, and there's a real opportunity to ensure that it grows into something worthwhile that can allow people to get a job, put food on their table for their families, and grow into a professional, either by starting an enablement and understanding how the business works and going elsewhere, or simply growing in that field itself. So I really love those two things.
You're on mute, Benny.
Benny, unmute, man.
Well, on mute, man.
That should be my new name.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate all that. That's those are all really good points.
I did want to ask you, what's your podcast's name?
A Coffee, Collaboration, and Enablement. My website is trustenablement.com. But the podcast is Coffee, Collaboration, and Enablement. And we've done, geez, you're almost up with us. I've done a little over 200 episodes. I see you're like a 164, 165. You're going to blow past us anytime now.
Well, when did you start your podcast?
Last summer.
Yeah, I started in 2018, so I think you've blown past me a
Okay.
while back.
Let's not do comparisons then. It was a bad one. That was a bad comparison.
It's all
I
good.
failed twice here, Benny. I raised the issue about losing the customer.
I don't see them as failures. I see them as opportunities to learn.
No, not at all. Not at all, Ramsey. I'm just kidding.
All right. So the second question, and I think you kind of answered it, would have been, what would you change about enablement? But I'm going to change it a little bit.
Please.
How do you see companies improving enablement within their different silos, or improving collaboration within their different silos?
I think there's still a hesitancy or fear of breaking down those silos. I think so many of today's leaders in my age group, in my 50s, 55, are probably stuck in our ways a little bit about, I get rewarded by doing X. I'm going to do X, and I'm not going to worry about what Ramsey does. That's his concern. I do think that that's a problem. What cheers me up is I look at my daughters, and my daughters are both in their mid to late 20s now. One of my daughters works in marketing at a company, and I just see a highly collaborative approach in her. And I'm hoping that's representative of a generational shift around a desire to make work less, to bridge that divide between work and personal life, to build connections and relationships in a way that I think will also help break down some of these barriers and silos. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but to me, I think the best companies are starting to look at, and this is not new, they've been around forever, OKRs. I think systems like OKRs promote having teams align on business level objectives in a way that it does blend down throughout, flow down throughout the organization, and aligns goals across those organizations and promotes collaboration. I'm optimistic that's picking up speed a little bit, But OKRs have been around, geez, for a couple of decades, 3 decades. You know, Google was using them with John Doerr, educating them on the concept back in the mid 90s, I think, when they started, if I have my timing right. So, but I do have optimism that things like that will get better, both generationally and hopefully intellectually.
And OKRs are objective and key results for those who don't know.
I apologize. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
No need to apologize. This is a fun conversation. It's been great so far. And Benny, if you're off mute.
Third time.
He's on mute. He's on mute. I know it.
This time, am I? No, I'm good.
No, you're not.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point actually about, sorry, it's going to really go in the spirit of the not so fire round. Very interesting point you mentioned about, you know, with your daughter's workplace, kind of them being or having that more, or perhaps, you know, having that more collaborative just way of being more naturally. I definitely see that benefit, and I don't know if this has always been the case. Obviously, I haven't been around for longer than I have, but that experience you have when you really like start to cross the boundaries, and maybe it's like not a good thing from a political correctness perspective, but whatever. When you start to cross the boundaries between work and fun, or I guess like that friendship, personal relationship, and professional relationship, I find that the work that we're able to do when we do have, I guess, a more blurry boundary between the two, it's so much more, I don't know, interesting, fun, engaging, just because you're kind of hanging out and doing something with a friend rather than doing something purely for the professional context.
Yeah, you're more productive when you're engaged and feeling like you're collaborating and supporting people. I forget which university did this research, but they actually demonstrated that, at least in this study, that just the thought of working in a collaborative project with somebody made people perform more work. They actually worked longer and had higher output per, you know, time spent, because they thought that they were working with a partner on something. They didn't want to let the partner down. And I forget exactly how they put together the research scenario, but I thought that was really interesting. Just the thought that I don't want to let somebody down. I'm going to work a little harder, a little bit more, even though there actually was nobody on the other side that they were supporting. It wasn't like they were friends or anything. It was just these students put together, or thought they were put together. So there is something really strong to collaboration and that mutual reciprocity that we all talk about when it comes to sales and other things. It's real and it's a strong motivator.
Fair. It really goes to that idea of humans being social creatures. Like, even if you are a very solitary person, you're somebody that likes to sit in their cubicle and just put their head down and work, you're probably putting in good work so that you're either supporting somebody that work gets passed on to, or other people you're working with, even if not directly, are going to somehow benefit from the work you're doing. And so you have incentive to do a good job, or you typically are going to just sit there and do a good job if that's your style, because you don't want to disappoint them. Even though
humans from the beginning of time have been codified to work as part of a group, as and I'm doing this, I read too much, I listen to Audible, I read whatever. I'm taking this master class called the Creative Thinking Project or something like that, and they were talking about how did early humans survive. You know, you're sitting there across from a saber-toothed tiger or a woolly mammoth. They weren't faster. Humans weren't faster. They weren't bigger, they weren't necessarily smarter, but they worked together, and they all worked as one. And that collaboration was key to our success as the human species. It also leads to some level of groupthink, which is a negative outcome, but we have that natural desire to support each other. It's just built into who we are as a species.
Amazing. And sorry for belaboring this question, haven't even got to the question, but what an amazing segue to it. So we'll have a link to Coffee, Collaboration, and Enablement in our show notes, and obviously a great resource for anybody to want to learn more about revenue enablement. What would you say are some other books, tools, or other resources that you may recommend to anybody that wants to learn more about the space and really just be more effective at it?
I'd say the following. I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently, because I think it's an interesting question. There's a blog, there's a website called Farnham Street, fs.blog. And what I love about them and the books that they put out a couple of books on the great mental models. And they speak to the fact that these mental models specifically speak to the fact that most of us go through life solving problems using one or two approaches. You know, we always solve a problem this way, or we solve a problem that way. And there's dozens of different ways to think about the problems we're facing. There's different ways to view them that inspire different types of creativity. You know, and if you think about it this way, and what I like about these books is they force you to be more creative and think longer and more importantly about things. If you were to look at, and it's this, I'll give you this example, Benny. If you're sitting on a train right now and somebody on that train is bouncing a ball up and down in the air or throwing a ball up and down in the air, what speed is that ball moving at? Well, from your perspective, it's not moving forward at all. It's just up and down. But if I'm standing outside that train and watching you go by, my perception is that ball's flying at the same speed as the train. Now, which perspective is right? Well, they both are. So the idea of learning more tricks and techniques about how to actually learn and how to think, which I think Farnham Street does a particularly good job. And there's two books by this guy, Shane Parrish, called The Great Mental Models, Volume 1 and 2. I think those books are phenomenal because they forget about revenue enablement for a second. They really talk to how we do better as humans, about how we do our jobs overall. I also think there's another book that I really highly recommend called Wait by Frank Portnoy. Again, it's not about revenue enablement, but it's about decision making overall. And everybody in any role in a company, I don't care if you're an engineer in the back of the house or a salesperson in the front of house, how you think and how you process and how you use time to your benefit is really important to understand as well. And I think those are two books that I just really get excited about because they go towards how we as humans can be better at the skills and competencies around thinking and learning that are so critical to doing our jobs well, regardless of what job we're doing. So to me, I don't have a book that I would recommend necessarily around enablement specifically. There's a handful of really good ones. My dear friend Roderick Jefferson recently wrote a great book about Sales Enablement 3.0. And while I disagree with him on a few of the points in there, he did ask me to write in the forward and leave a quote for the book. I think it's a really good book. I think he's super smart and did a great job. So anybody looking about something specifically about enablement, I would encourage them to check out Roderick's book. Smart guy, really nice guy. But I think it's more important for all of us to stop and step back and think about how do we think and learn. Because we all operate with blinders on. We just don't always realize what those blinders are.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's probably some of my favorite. Well, I don't read nearly as much as I should, but I guess just content pieces to ever take in are typically those that aren't necessarily so focused to just, a specific thing or another, but more generic, I guess, that could allow you to maybe apply whatever you learn to all sorts of different aspects of life. So it's
yeah, and I think if we improve the way we think, if we improve the way that we use the time we're given, that helps us in our personal lives and our professional lives, regardless of profession.
100%. Agreed.
Yeah, those books are going on the reading list. The long
reading list.
Ever find that the reading list doesn't get shorter?
Oh my God, it never gets shorter.
Yeah.
It never. Every time I talk to somebody, they're like, "Hey, have you read this?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I never read it. Let me add it to my Audible wish list, or to my Kindle, list, or whatever." So depending on where I am.
I'm reading books like there's Limitless, there's Atomic Habits, and all that. The problem with these books is that they cite other books in them, and they say you should read them. So I'm reading one book and coming out with 5 more books for the reading list.
I'm with you, but that's why it's a journey and an adventure, my friend. It's an awesome experience.
Yep. All right. Final question of the not so fly round. Is there a habit that you're working on, whether it's within your personal life or at work today?
My personal area that I always try to improve upon is It's going to sound funny, but attention to rigorous detail. I'm very good and I love looking at the big picture and analyzing and seeing how they all come together and they flow. And I very comfortably say, well, obviously this connects to this and this connects to this, but being able to articulate it in a way that it's super easy for somebody else to grasp, work with, shoot down, implement. That's a skill that I just think I always need to improve upon because it's the opposite of my normal, comfortable mental models.
Yeah.
I see the world from the sky and it's harder for me to get down to the ground and think about, oh crap, that's why that won't work. I do it, but it's an area where I just every day need to get better.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. It's a slog sometimes to get into that amount of details. It's hard. It's just sometimes it's easy for me to see the 10,000 foot view, and if I don't see the 10,000 foot view, I will never understand the details.
Amen. And I'm the same way, Ramsey. And both views are important. Yeah. All those different viewpoints are important. So for me, that's one broad category or broad area where I'm always trying to get better. And some days I feel like I'm taking steps forward, and some days I feel like crap, I just took a big step back. But that's life.
Yeah.
And you recognize it, right? Which is, I think, like one of the biggest steps when you do take those steps back is if you recognize that was a step back. I mean, that's more than half the battle right there, I'd imagine.
It is, but at the age of 55, I'm probably never going to get better, Denny. I'm gonna, be the same pain in the ass I am now 30 years from now.
I've done well so far. So.
All right. John, if people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
Either reach out to me on LinkedIn or go to trustenablement.com and fill out the contact form, and I'll get an email and connect 100% that way as well.
Great. We're going to leave links to those, to both of those in the show notes. You are not John Moore. You are the collaborator. So from now on, you shall be called Mr. Collaborator. And thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks, Ramsey and Benny. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, guys.
Likewise. And this brings us to the end of the show. Thanks, John, for coming on. Thank you, Benny, for being here.
Hey, I can never miss.
It's hit or miss sometimes with when you're like one of the few SEs in a company and supporting worldwide. So,
indeed, I suppose if every guest had a background like today's, I'd be here every time. But
what do you think about these virtual backgrounds?
I think they're interesting. I think I personally don't use them as often as I could. But yeah, I think it's an interesting way to convey some personality. I know at my old job when I first started growing out the beard, it's probably more applicable now. But I used to have my background for some internal internal sales meetings as either the Unabomber cabin in the background or sometimes like something out in the woods. But yeah, I think it's fun and creative. I think it could be. Yeah, I mean, does it take away from the professionalism of things? Potentially, yeah. Like I was actually just thinking, if you're a jet pilot, in the middle of a business meeting, does it take away from it? Potentially, but it's still kind of cool. And I think given the context that COVID has kind of given the world, it's more.
It depends on what's behind you. Like with John's background, I don't know why we're talking about the background specifically, but with his background, it's very it looks like a nice office. Yeah. It looks like a background, but it has a nice office, and it's very well thought out. We talked about it after the call. So I'd be curious what people think about using backgrounds in customer meetings. And I'm not talking like the background I'm using right now where I'm like in Top Gun, but generally speaking, like having a nice background. I personally, you want to say something? Go ahead.
No, well, it's only just based on something you mentioned, which is you're right, actually. There is something different about a professional background that seems as if it isn't a background at all versus something that's very obviously a background. But even that, I don't know how I feel, because sometimes halfway through the call, I'll realize, oh, that's not their real background. Wait, what?
Well, you can tell unless they have a green screen behind them. But that's why, I came up with all of this. I went through the effort of doing this. It's not perfect by any means. There's a window here that keeps shining light from behind me. Anyways, I guess we need to collaborate and fix the background.
No, it's good. It's good. I actually I like this one quite a bit, just because. well, again, at least in this week, it was a regular background with some fun little like personality things in there that weren't too obtrusive or obstructive rather.
And it has like I've never read this book, Tribe of Mentors, but it's like a conversation starter at some point. And he had a lot of conversation starters in his background.
Exactly.
And generally speaking, when you're in sales, you're hoping that the customer would comment about something just so you can have a conversation, right? Build rapport in one way or another. And I guess having a virtual background. And I've done this the Top Gun jet scene with customers that I've tried like I'm starting to have that good relationship with, and I want to take it to like, okay, let's be friendly, let's be friends, kind of. So I use that, and we kind of laugh about it and move on. But if I'm meeting a CTO for the first time, I'm probably gonna even move some of this stuff away and have a bland background.
Fair. Yeah, I guess it's all about context in the end. That makes sense.
That again, so the intro and the outro had nothing to do with the show today, but I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed talking to John and trying to understand like where revenue enablement comes when it comes to sales engineering. There's a lot of it related to sales and marketing. Hopefully, sales engineering will also take off at some point when it comes to enablement. And I think VMware has a great sales engineering enablement. I'm not sure. I have to double check on that. I'll try to get someone from there. I think we got Marjorie a while back.
Oh.
Marjorie Abdul Karim, before you started showing up. Anyways, I'll look into it.
Fair. And I guess it seems like enablement is just one of those things that is like sales engineers are so well poised to be such a strong part of that whole enablement play. And so I think it's just a matter of time. Like if not already, I think
so our enablement, you learn like virtual selling, you learn challenger sale or Sandler method or solution selling. No one's ever brought Chris White or John Kerr or any of those to my company to give us a training about sales engineering in general. It's like, hey, you go figure it out. And which is why I see most of the sales engineers in my company are fairly technical, and they're more like post-sales support because we have repeat customers. So, like I feel like most companies need to do a lot better job when it comes to training their SEs.
Fair enough. Yeah, I guess just like getting a holistic picture as to what does revenue enablement really mean for any given organization. I think there's probably too many traditional senses of just like sales training, sales rep training specifically, and not much more beyond that. Maybe some like CS training as well. But like, I think hopefully companies are starting to come around to get a holistic view as to all the different pieces that play a part. And we're obviously biased, but SEs play a pretty strong part in the whole process.
Yeah, we're like, I've been like, if you play football, I've heard them being called the linebackers. If we do like we're the workhorses. Anyways, long story short, that was a great conversation with John, and hopefully sales engineering will have a lot more enablement that's involved in it.
All right. It'll be enabled to succeed. I don't know.
With that, this is Ramsey signing off.
And Benny.
Not after that joke.